If you look at like literally any major paradigm shift in history, whether that's the collapse of a huge empire or some massive scientific revolution, there's always this prologue phase.
Oh, absolutely. It's never just out of nowhere.
Right. It's this period of deep, almost hidden calibration where all the geographical, psychological, and sociological pieces are just kind of being positioned on the board before the real catalyst arrives.
Yeah, the stage setting.
Exactly. And today, we are going to look at one of the most profound historical and spiritual prologues ever recorded. But real quick, before we jump into this exploration, please take a quick second right now to subscribe, like, and follow this deep dive.
Please do.
Yeah, so you never miss our analyses of these complex historical frameworks. We really rely on you, the listener, to keep these conversations going.
We really do. So for today's deep dive, we're dissecting the foundational architecture laid out in Chapter 1 of Maulana Maki's Urdu series on the Sirat-un-Nabi.
Which is the biography of the Prophet.
Right. And our objective here is to really unpack the specific theological and historical timeline that set the stage for the arrival of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and his companions. May Allah be pleased with them.
And as always, just a quick reminder, our role here is just to act as your guides through this source material. We're entirely impartial.
Yeah, we're just examining the narrative arc, the underlying logic, and the historical mechanisms that are presented in this specific text.
Exactly, just analyzing how the text constructs the necessity for this monumental shift in Arabia. So let's jump straight into it.
Let's do it.
Okay, so traditional Islamic scholarship usually begins with praises to the Creator, right? Establishing that cosmological hierarchy.
Standard practice, yeah.
But this specific chapter, it immediately anchors its narrative by quoting Surah Al-Jumu'ah from the Quran. And the premise it presents is that a messenger was sent among the, and this is a key word, the unlettered, to purify them and teach the book.
Because they were previously in clear error. That's the exact phrasing.
Right, clear error. Now, I want to challenge this premise of the unlettered society for a second, because usually we equate a lack of written codification with a lack of sophistication.
Oh, for sure. We think no books means no culture.
Yeah. So why would a paradigm-shifting message intentionally target a society that lacked a vast library of written philosophy or, complex legal codes?
Well, you have to consider the geopolitical landscape of the era. I mean, look at what was surrounding them. You had the Byzantine Empire. You had the Sassanid Persian Empire.
Massive superpowers.
Huge. And these were hyper-structured societies. They had centuries of entrenched bureaucratic law, rigid philosophical traditions, and state religions that were deeply codified.
Right, they had a lot of legacy code.
Exactly. Heavily saturated with legacy code.
Yeah.
So when a society is that entrenched, introducing a fundamentally new theological architecture is, it's incredibly difficult.
Because you aren't just building something new,
Yeah.
right? You had to dismantle all those massive institutional frameworks first.
Right. But an unlettered society, the term used is Umayyan in Arabic, they relied entirely on oral tradition, on memory and poetry.
So they were basically a cognitive blank slate.
In a way, yes. I mean, they possessed immense linguistic capacity and memory, like truly staggering memory. But they were unburdened by the rigid dogmas of those surrounding empires.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because the lack of a written tradition in this context is actually a feature, not a bug.
Yeah, exactly.
It provides a fertile, unobstructed psychological landscape for a new ideology. But, and this is a big, the source material does not characterize this landscape as pure or innocent.
No, not at all.
It uses the phrase clear error. And that suggests a systemic rot. They weren't just a blank slate, they were a corrupted slate.
They had completely lost whatever original theological compass they might have had. They were wandering.
Which brings us to this profoundly analytical hadith, a documented saying mentioned in the text. This is where Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and his companions, may Allah be pleased with them, are contextualized through a very specific sequence of titles.
What's fascinating here is that the sequence of these titles isn't just a list of names. It's basically a functional blueprint.
Like a cosmic job description.
Yes. They describe the precise mechanism of how this clear error was going to be dismantled and replaced. So the first titles mentioned are Muhammad and Ahmad.
Which both revolve around the concept of being the praised one, right?
Right. This establishes the ultimate nature of the message itself. It's something inherently harmonious and worthy of elevation.
But, I mean, you can't just layer an ideology of praise on top of clear error.
No, you absolutely cannot.
You can't build a pristine structure on a rotten foundation.
Which necessitates the very next title on the list, al-Mahi.
Al-Mahi. And the text translates this as the obliterator by whom Allah obliterates disbelief. I mean, let's just pause on that word for a second. Obliterator.
It's heavy.
It's incredibly aggressive. It's an absolute term. It does not imply reform.
No, reform is gentle.
Right. If a society is in clear error, you might assume they just need a reformer. Someone to adjust the moral dials, update the laws, guide the culture back on track.
Sure, like a course correction.
But obliteration,
Hmm.
that suggests that the ideological framework of the society is entirely irredeemable.
It speaks to the sheer depth of the corruption. I mean, societal reform only works when the core foundation is still somewhat sound, right? Like you're just fixing structural damage.
Patching holes in the drywall.
Exactly. But the theological claim here is that the foundational reality of their worldview, their understanding of the divine, of existence, of human purpose, was fundamentally inverted.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So to introduce pure monotheism into a society steeped in deep multi-generational polytheism, it requires an epistemic clearing of the board.
So Al-Mahi functions as like an ideological bulldozer.
That's a great way to put it. The disbelief must be entirely eradicated because in this paradigm, truth and falsehood just cannot cohabitate in the same ideological space.
Yeah. But wait, obliteration creates a vacuum.
It does.
If you successfully dismantle the entire belief system of an unlettered society, you are left with massive psychological and sociological chaos.
Total freefall.
Right. People need an organizing principle.
Yeah.
If the old structure is completely gone, what stops the society from simply dissolving into anarchy?
Well, that is the exact function of the subsequent title in the Hadith, Al-Hashir.
The gatherer.
Exactly. The text translates this as the gatherer at whose feet people will be assembled. Because once the obliteration of the false paradigms is complete, you have to establish a new center of gravity.
Yeah.
Al-Hashir acts as that unifying force. The methodology involves tearing down all those fragmented tribal and polytheistic loyalties that divided everyone, and then immediately gathering them around a singular absolute truth.
So the entire project of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and his companions, may Allah be pleased with them, relies on this two-step mechanism.
Right. Radical dismantling of the old, followed by the cohesive gathering of the new.
And then we reach the final stage of this process, the title Al-Aqib,
The last in succession.
after whom there is no prophet. The seal. So if we view these titles as a sequence, like a timeline, Al-Aqib provides permanence.
Yes.
You obliterate the error, you gather the society around the truth, and then you seal the vault. You declare the process complete so that no further alterations can be made.
It finalizes the theological timeline. I mean, the claim in the text is that the continuous cycle of revelation, which historically involved prophets arriving, societies corrupting the message, and then new prophets arriving to correct it, that cycle has reached its terminus.
The structural integrity of this final gathering is meant to be permanent.
Precisely. But to truly understand the sheer scale of the clear error that necessitated an obliterator and a gatherer in the first place, we actually have to go back further.
We have to trace the timeline back.
We have to look at the geographical and historical origins of the Arabian paradigm. How did the region get to that point of clear error?
Here's where it gets really interesting. Because the historical timeline presented in the source marks a massive geopolitical pivot.
A huge shift.
For centuries, the center of gravity for divine revelation was firmly rooted in the Levant, Egypt, the Fertile Crescent.
Yeah, the line of prophethood rested with Bani Israel, the children of Israel.
Right, moving through figures like Prophet Yusuf Joseph and his descendants. That was the established theater of operations. But then the narrative suddenly shifts the focus away from those fertile empires entirely.
It traces a new lineage.
Yeah, through Prophet Ishmael and his father, Prophet Abraham.
And that relocation of Ibrahim from the fertile regions of Sham to the utterly barren landscape of the Arabian Peninsula, specifically Mecca, is the foundational hinge of this entire history.
It is a totally calculated removal from the centers of civilization.
It really is.
But let's analyze the logic of that removal. I mean, if you hold a universal truth, wouldn't the most efficient strategy be to establish it in the centers of influence?
Yeah, I think so, yeah.
Why take the pure monotheistic message away from the trade hubs, the agricultural centers, and the established cities of Sham, and just isolate it in a valley composed literally entirely of rock and sand?
Where just surviving the day is a struggle.
Exactly. Simple biological survival is difficult. Why plant the seed there?
Well, efficiency in spreading an idea is very different from preserving the purity of an idea.
Oh, that's a really good point.
Think about the Fertile Crescent. It was a crossroads of empires. It was constantly subjected to shifting political powers, syncretism, and cultural imperialism.
Right, everyone is trading goods, but they're also trading gods.
Exactly. When ideologies mix in those high-traffic zones, they inevitably dilute. By moving to the barren isolation of Mecca, Ibrahim was essentially establishing a quarantine zone for pure monotheism.
A quarantine zone, I love that analogy.
The harshness of the environment is a barrier to entry. It prevents the kind of casual corruption that occurs in comfortable cosmopolitan societies.
It strips away all the material distractions, and the defining ethos of Ibrahim presented in the text really relies on this specific conceptual state.
His title is Khalilullah, the friend of Allah.
And his operational mindset is captured perfectly in this one phrase from the text. Hasbunallah wa ni'mal wakil.
Sufficient for us is Allah, and he is the best disposer of affairs.
And that isn't just some theological platitude. I mean, in the context of a barren desert, it is a literal survival mechanism.
If you are standing in a rocky valley with no water, no agriculture, and literally no socioeconomic safety net, human agency is reduced to zero.
Zero.
You cannot rely on the state, you cannot rely on wealth, you can't even rely on the environment.
Absolute reliance on the unseen creator is the only psychological framework that keeps you from just giving up and falling into despair.
Which is the very essence of being a Hanif. And that's a term the source explicitly applies to Ibrahim.
Right. A Hanif is a pure monotheist who naturally inclines toward truth and turns away from falsehood.
And the text goes out of its way. It specifically clarifies that he was neither a Jew nor a Christian in the later codified senses, and unequivocally never a polytheist.
He was the unadulterated baseline.
The absolute pure source.
And the physical manifestation of that unadulterated baseline is the Kaaba, which was built by Ibrahim and Ismail.
Yeah.
Look at the architectural psychology of the Kaaba. It is just a cube.
It's so simple.
In a world where religious structures were becoming increasingly ornate, I mean, you have Greek temples with massive colonnades, Persian ziggurats, complex statues of deities everywhere.
Golden idols, massive frescoes.
Right. And against all that, the Kaaba is an exercise in absolute minimalism. It's an empty structure. It isn't meant to house a representation of the divine.
Because it's meant to represent the unrepresentable nature of the one God.
That structural emptiness is the entire point. It is a physical void meant to be filled only with the concept of absolute monotheism.
It was designed from the ground up to be the ultimate sanctuary, and it was protected by this wildly inhospitable desert surrounding it.
So the stage was set for a lineage of pure belief, entirely insulated from those polytheistic empires to the north and east.
Which brings us to the core tension of the whole narrative.
Right. Because if you have this isolated minimalist sanctuary built by the ultimate Hanif, functioning perfectly as a quarantine zone, how does the system fail?
How do things go so wrong?
Exactly. How do we arrive at the clear error that Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and his companions, may Allah be pleased with them, eventually had to obliterate?
The corruption didn't happen through a Byzantine invasion.
Or a Persian conquest. The ideological breach came from within.
It did. The source introduces a deeply consequential historical figure here. Ammar ibn Luhai.
The vector for the contagion.
He is the literal vector for the ideological contagion. So the historical claim in the text is that Ammar ibn Luhai traveled up to the region of Sham, interacted with the Amalekites up there, and literally brought physical idols back to the Arabian Peninsula.
He introduced shirk, the association of partners with God, or polytheism, directly into the sanctuary of the Kaaba.
Oh.
But let's examine the sociology of that moment, because it's baffling.
It really is.
You have this unlettered, deeply traditional society that has operated on the pure monotheism of Ibrahim for generations. Why on earth would they accept foreign idols?
People usually violently reject sudden theological shifts.
Usually, yeah.
Yeah.
Ammar ibn Luhai couldn't have just dropped a bunch of statues in the Kaaba and demanded obedience. The people would have revolted.
Well, we have to consider human cognitive biases here.
Okay, tell me more about that.
The abstract, unseen monotheism of Ibrahim requires immense intellectual and spiritual discipline.
Right, that Hasbunallah wa ni'mal wakil reliance.
Exactly. It requires absolute terrifying reliance on the unseen. And it is incredibly difficult for the human mind to sustain that level of abstraction over centuries without faltering.
We want things we can see.
We do. So when Ammar ibn Luhai went up to Sham and observed the Amalekites, he likely saw a society that was agriculturally prosperous. They were seemingly powerful, and they were using these tangible, physical intermediaries to commune with the divine.
It's the trap of tangible technology.
That's a great way to put it.
He probably didn't present these idols as a replacement for the creator.
No, of course not.
He probably presented it as an upgrade.
Right.
Like, hey, look at these advanced societies. They have physical focal points. We can use these statues to get closer to the divine, to ask for rain, to ask for victory.
It's a cognitive shortcut. An idol is something you can touch, see, and conceptually control. The unseen God of Ibrahim cannot be controlled or easily visualized.
So that cognitive shortcut is the actual mechanism of the clear air. It's a devolution disguised as an innovation.
Exactly. And by bringing the idols into the Kaaba, Ammar ibn Luhai hijacked the psychological weight of Ibrahim's sanctuary.
Oh, that's insidious. The people didn't stop revering the Kaaba.
No, they just repurposed it. The empty cube, which was originally designed to reflect the unseen, became a literal storage unit for hundreds of physical deities.
So the isolation of the desert, which was meant to preserve the purity of the faith, instead created this closed ecosystem.
Yeah, an incubator.
Where this new polytheistic error incubated, mutated, and became fiercely entrenched over the centuries.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, the wider world was actually aware of this ideological decay.
Right. The text points out that the people of the book, the Allah Kitab, these are the scholars of the established religious traditions in the surrounding regions. They knew about this deep corruption in Arabia.
They held prophecies indicating that a corrective force, a new prophet, would eventually emerge from this specific lineage to rectify the error.
So the geographical quarantine zone had failed, but it was still the designated staging ground.
The tension at this point in the historical timeline is just absolute.
You have the original divine intent of Ibrahim standing in total contrast to the entrenched earthly corruption introduced by Ammar ibn Luhai.
You have an unlettered society fiercely guarding a sanctuary of idols, wholly disconnected from its original purpose.
Which perfectly explains why the title, Al-Mahi, the Obliterator, is the only logical mechanism for resolution.
You cannot gently reform a society whose entire power structure and economy are now based on the idolatry housed in the Kaaba.
Right. People are making money off pilgrims coming to see these idols.
Exactly. The slate had to be wiped clean.
Okay, so this clash between the corrupted physical reality of Mecca and the impending divine correction, it culminates in a highly specific, highly physical event.
The climax of the historical prologue.
Right. Just before the arrival of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and his companions, may Allah be pleased with them, the narrative introduces the event of the Ashab al-Fil.
The companions of the elephant. This event is detailed in Surah Al-Fil.
And it represents a massive external disruption to this closed ecosystem of Mecca.
An overwhelming military force, famously utilizing a war elephant, marches on the sanctuary with the explicit intent of destroying the Kaaba.
I mean, let's just consider the psychological warfare of a war elephant in the ancient Arabian context.
It would be mind-blowing.
To an unlettered desert-dwelling society, an elephant isn't just an animal, it's like a biological siege engine.
It's an alien behemoth to them.
Right. It represents the absolute zenith of human, imperial, and logistical power. You have to feed it, you have to transport it, and command it across hundreds of miles of hostile terrain.
For the Meccans, seeing this force approaching their valley would induce total paralysis.
It's a kinetic force that they have absolutely no means to defend against.
They were facing the literal erasure of their physical center of gravity.
But the narrative details that this massive earthly power is systematically dismantled, and not by a human counteroffensive.
No, by an act of absolute divine asymmetry.
The text describes the deployment of Ababil, flocks of birds.
The asymmetry is the entire point of the historical memory here.
So what does this all mean? You have the largest, most dominant land mammal representing human arrogance and imperial might. And it is opposed by the smallest, most fragile of creatures.
And the birds aren't utilizing conventional weapons.
No. They drop stones of baked clay, Sigil.
And the result of this asymmetrical defense is absolute devastation. The text uses this highly evocative image. The massive army is turned into eaten straw.
Eaten straw, wow.
It reduces the unstoppable war machine to the equivalent of digested agricultural waste.
That is deeply humiliating for an imperial army.
It strips the imperial force of all dignity, terror, and physical cohesion. It is an effortless annihilation of earthly power.
But let's dig into the why of this event.
This raises an important question, yeah.
Why does this specific miraculous defense of the sanctuary occur at this exact moment in the timeline? Because the Kaaba, at this point, is filled with the idols brought by Ammar ibn Luhai.
Right, it's a house of idols.
It is the epicenter of the clear air. Why would divine intervention protect a building that is currently functioning as the headquarters of polytheism?
Because of the temporal anchor of the event.
The timeline.
Yes. The narrative emphasizes that this defense occurred in the exact same year that the story of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and his companions, may Allah be pleased with them, would physically begin in this world.
His birth year, famously known as the Year of the Elephant.
So the physical preservation of the Kaaba was a necessary prerequisite for the spiritual cleansing that was about to occur.
It is the ultimate divine staging maneuver.
It really is.
If the army of the elephant had leveled the Kaaba, the physical anchor of Ibrahim's legacy would have been erased entirely. The history would have been severed.
God intervened to protect the physical stone cube, preserving the vessel itself, so that the incoming prophet, Al-Mahdi,
The obliterator.
could eventually empty the poisoned water and refill it with the pure monotheism of Ibrahim.
The logic of the timeline resolves perfectly. The physical space is secured against external imperial destruction, locking in the geography.
The society remains unlettered, locking in the cognitive blank slate.
And the corruption of the idols remains localized within the sanctuary, defining the exact parameters of the clear error that needs to be fixed.
The stage is entirely set, structurally and ideologically, for the arrival of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and his companions, may Allah be pleased with them, to execute the mandate of the obliterator and the gatherer.
It is an incredibly precise historical architecture. Every single element, from the isolation of the desert to the psychology of the idols to the final asymmetrical defense of the sanctuary, it all serves a specific, necessary function in preparing the ground for the paradigm shift.
It's a masterclass in divine planning, as presented in the text.
It really is. Now, as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you, the listener, with a final thought to ponder regarding the mechanics of belief we've just analyzed.
It's something we should all think about.
Yeah. We traced how a society's foundational truth, the absolute pure monotheism of Ibrahim, could be entirely subverted over generations. And it didn't happen through conquest. It happened through the slow creeping acceptance of a tangible shortcut introduced by one man, Amr ibn Luhai.
Just looking for an easier way.
Right. So if a foundational truth that was so deeply rooted could mutate into clear error, simply because human nature desires an easier, more visual path, how secure are the ideological and cultural norms we operate under today?
That's a chilling thought.
Are the fundamental truths of our own era as permanent as we believe? Or are we continually susceptible to slow, unseen ideological drift?
Are we adopting our own cognitive shortcuts without realizing it?
Exactly. It is a complex mechanism to consider, and it really highlights why analyzing these historical prologues is so incredibly vital for us today.
Absolutely.
Well, if you found this exploration of the theological and historical stage setting valuable, please subscribe, like, and follow the show right now.
Hit those buttons.
Your engagement really does allow us to continue bringing you these extensive breakdowns of historical frameworks. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the historical prelude of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and his companions. May Allah be pleased with them.